So you ready to go, Elliot?
Been ready.
All right. What are we doing today?
Well, first I got to get over, I guess, you writing this episode, because, first of all, the jokes in it are, I'm just going to warn everybody now, they're terrible. Andy wrote, he tried to do comedy, and it's just, I don't know. Matt, did you think this episode was funny?
It was kind of, I don't know. It was a tough one.
It's tough. Yeah. Well, we're going to have fun with it. The name of the episode, I was confused at first.
Okay, you going to say it, or did you forget which one's which?
It's Bokashi? Is it Bokashi?
Yeah, it is.
Not Bukashi.
No, not Bukaki.
Bokashi.
Bow, like a bow on a present.
Kashi, like the cereal.
Kashi, like the cereal.
Got it.
Cereal present.
Present cereal. Got it.
Yes, there you go.
That was fun.
Wasn't it? So you can find out about Bokashi on Cornhub.
Oh, God.
Right, Elliot? A lot of corn tent going on over there.
Yeah, we gotta get that on lockdown. We gotta get Cornhub on lockdown.
Hell yeah. Stickers, they're coming.
That's gonna be so fun. That's gonna be so fun as well.
Or should we start this? Or we're just going to talk about like fucking Cornhub the whole time?
We're strictly Cornhub podcast now. All we talk about is all corn all the time. We're like that little TikTok kid.
That was that one time. That was the 100th episode.
Yeah, I thought I got it all out, but I didn't.
Apparently not.
We're back.
We're back. Back with the Poor Pearls Almanac. Niche farm content.
Thank you, Matt. That was nice.
Smooth.
He's better at this than both of us.
Yes. That's why we brought him.
That's why I'm paid the huge bucks.
In corn.
Yeah.
He gets paid in the cobs. That's all I'm going to say.
Ooh.
2 cobs, one podcast.
God damn it.
All right. We gotta move on.
Bokashi. So Bokashi is one of those things, I think, for a lot of people in like our audience. We'll just call them our audience. They've heard about it. If you spent enough time around like organic agriculture, you've at least heard of it. And it's one of those things that seems a little bit weird. It's like composting with extra steps, like fermentation. And I think for a lot of people, fermentation is like this really intimidating thing. I know it is for me, like making like any fermented foods. I'm always afraid I'm going to screw it up. But obviously at this point, I think most people have at least tried making their fermented plant juice.
I mean, obviously everyone's tried that.
Obviously. So this one shouldn't be a very big deal at all. And like everything we cover on this podcast, we'll take some time and see if the science actually backs up the claims of it being better than compost.
Right. And I'm here to be podcast muscle. So go listen to our FPJ and our other fermented plant juice foliar spray recipe content. You know how to find all that shit. And do all that now. Not now. After you finish the episode. No breaks in between. You will binge me.
So while not popular here in the United States, Bokashi does have a long history in Southeastern Asia and Japan. The general idea is that it's a compost process, but it's not actually compost. It uses a specific group of microbes to anaerobically ferment your waste, which leaves you with a compost. I know I'm calling it compost and it's not compost, that can be quickly used by the microorganisms in the soil. Unlike traditional compost, you don't need to measure out greens and browns, and it doesn't generate heat or gases, and all of the byproducts are contained within a closed system, so nutrients aren't theoretically lost in the composting process. This also means there's no smells, mostly, no insects, and no rodent problems. So it sounds pretty perfect, right?
It kind of does, because my dad kind of squeals like a baby when he sees some bugs, and I think I could probably get him to do this.
Yeah, and my personal favorite is it's a lot easier to compost meat and dairy.
Definitely. It's less worry for sure when you're dealing with those products. Now, despite the fact I listed all of the great things about Bokashi, there might be some times when it's not the right composting solution for you. And again, we'll talk about that.
So talk to your doctor and see if Bokashi is right for you.
Elliot, our PR man, here to make sure you don't get overwhelmed by the Bokashi.
Never want to get overwhelmed.
Never want to get overwhelmed.
Lost in the sauce.
Lost in the anaerobic sauce. So we've talked about anaerobic fermentation quite a bit before. If it doesn't sound familiar, I'd suggest tuning into the Jadam episode if you want a bit of a deeper dive. Because I think a lot of things tie together from that episode and here. So much like Elliot, I'm going to plug a different episode. The point is that this isn't really a composting process, even though we're going to keep using the word composting, but a fermentation and breaking down of the minerals through that process. Compost is an aerobic process relying on oxygen, and an anaerobic compost pile stinks and can actually cause damage to your soils.
And if you listen to our compost episode a few weeks ago, if you want to learn about that side of things.
We're basically becoming the poor compost almanac, apparently. Because all we do is talk about dirt and shit.
All compost, all the time.
You know, that's what they say about almanacs. They compost.
I mean, yeah, they're paper.
And paper goes in the compost. It's the circle of life.
That's right.
And you know how long that circle is in the world of Bokashi? About 2 weeks. If you started listening to this podcast from the first episode Monday morning, started your Bokashi, and listened to all of our content during a 40-hour work week, you wouldn't even catch up before it was done.
Americans will use literally anything but the metric system.
Yeah, a few episodes ago, we used Shaquille O'Neal's, like the size of the person, as a measurement.
Shaq's.
Oh,
Shaq's.
actually, yeah.
Shaq's is
I forgot
a very,
about that one.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is a superior measuring system
We
for
also
the record.
used bears to count time.
True.
Yeah, we've done this a whole lot, so you're just gonna have to trust us on this one, I guess.
All right, so which one are we? 2 weeks. The time interval is paper and Bokashi. That's the new one we're adding.
No, it's Prol's episode or Prol's podcast. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a simple way to say that.
It's called the Poor Pole's Almanac, Andy. We named it for a reason.
Oh, shit. So we talked about anaerobic fermentation with the use of LAB and JMS in particular way back when. And some of the key things about anaerobic fermentation is that there's no oxygen and the pH of anaerobic conditions in soil or your food waste is pretty low. This reduces which types of microbes can survive in those conditions, and fortunately, methane-producing microbes can't survive. And you know what does survive, Elliot?
Yeah, I actually do know this one, fucker. It's lactobacillus
Literally can't be stopped.
Hell yeah.
Lacty boys.
coming at you. Don't ever say
Yes.
that again.
I'm doing it every time.
It reminds
Now
me of like a fucked up version of the Clockwork Orange.
Lacty boys?
Yeah, because all
Oh,
they did was
God.
drink milk
Yeah,
and wear
true.
diapers. They were weird. So when you said
love
that,
it.
I just got
I love it.
real visual popped into my head. It was kind of
Good.
fucked up.
Good. So given how fermentation works, specifically that like gases are released while minerals are unbound from like whatever you're fermenting, we're able to make nutrients bioavailable with minimal loss. The same way fermentation makes other foods more digestible for us. Now, it's not just LAB that's doing this work, but a number of other things, and we'll talk about whether or not they're legitimate bacteria. So for one example that's very common is purple non-sulfur bacteria, or PNSB.
Well, that seems very specific to have its own acronym and color assigned to it.
Right? And it is. Mostly because most folks aren't out there harvesting their own LAB. They're buying what's called EM1, which is just a prepackaged microorganism collection. The one we just listed a moment ago, which was picked by Dr. Teru Higa for their ability to be successful for this particular use. Not only have they been used for the average Bokashi bucket in an apartment, but have been used in things as big as sewage treatment plants and on farms.
I feel like that speaks well for like the capacity of Bokashi.
It also kind of shows alternatives to the way we process things using tons of chemicals, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, for sure. So your first question might be like, well, do we have to buy EM1 then to do this type of composting? And that seems pretty counterintuitive to the poor proles like mentality. Well, the answer is sort of. This shouldn't be a surprise, but people into microbes, not your typical capitalist supporting consumer.
Yeah, I don't imagine people who harvest microbes from the like air and soil are gonna like go out and buy some.
Yeah, no. So there's two methods really what it boils down to get around this. One is to buy it once and know how to keep it alive, kind of like a sourdough starter. And the other is to try to capture something similar to PNSB, which there is some YouTube content on. We'll cover it at some point if we have time.
The latest.
Yeah. Much like IMO3, you're gonna inoculate your waste with a Bokashi brand, which is literally just a starch they've added the microbes to without any competition, so they can hit a high enough critical mass so they can overcome any competition they might face already existing on your food scraps.
Okay, so if you have to add all of this and like overwhelm what's already on your food scraps, I'm assuming you can only add so much more waste, or at least proportionally the whole time, so that these microbes can get a chance to multiply in time, so it doesn't start to stink, and like it doesn't become just a trash pile.
Yeah, so that is true, and there's some really interesting things that happen in a Bokashi bucket while this fermentation process takes place, especially with the other bacteria that are in that bucket. But before we get there, we're going to take a quick break, listen to some really terrible ads that are probably just my voice, and then we're going to continue back with this conversation.
Welcome. You can call me Father Kyle, leader and spiritual guide at the Moonshade Garden Seed Company and Apothecary. Please join me, my wives, and our 19 barefoot children in planting seeds that will illuminate your consciousness. These seeds stem from my ancestral homeland, a place of ancient memory and traditional peoples, a place called Fort Collins. And make sure to ask about our planting crystal that is sure to enlighten your inner gardener and lighten your wallet. Moonshade Garden products can be found at any Beyond Organic grocery store in Southwestern California, and investment information can be found at our VC firm's website. Yes, we're that evil.com.
And we're back, and we're talking about Bokashi, Elliot.
I said nothing. Bokashi shit. No, damn it.
So proud of yourself.
All we do is talk about dirt and shit. I try to do what you do, and it just...
Right, to be fair, sometimes fermented shit.
Demanded?
That's what this episode is about, fermented shit.
I mean, this is not literally fermented shit, but Virkshire Veda is about fermented shit.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Listen, we do fermented, we do compost, and then we do shit, and then sometimes we mix them together. Like a beautiful orgy of nasty stuff.
We're just going to work our way around the Venn diagram.
And all of it is on Cornhub.
Oh, God.
Comes full circle.
This graduated to just a whole bunch of bullshit, and I'm sorry, everyone.
Yeah. I think we got to start issuing written apologies.
I'll do that.
First to Raytheon, and then...
Yeah.
Yeah. That's more about not getting sued, but
Lowry's is last.
Yeah.
I know we boosted sales.
Yeah, Lowry's owes us, first off.
Where would Lowry's salted...
I want an apology letter from them.
Yeah. Where would Lowry's seasoned salt be without the pop rolls?
They have not promoted our show.
Nowhere.
Just salt, no seasoning. Elliot adds that spice. Anyways, so let's talk about the best thing of all, Bokashi.
The man is Bokashi pilled. Boke pilled. You love to see it.
I won't lie, I hate that Andy tried to get Boke pilled in there.
Hell yeah.
Matt, you agreed to read it. I was going to read it, and I didn't want to, but I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
He just turned Bokashi into Boke pilled.
Listen, I'm like Compost Malone.
God damn it.
But now...
It's getting worse.
I'm going to...
We were graduating.
I'm going to be Boke pilled, thanks to Matt.
We were graduating to shit, now we're degrading into...
We're all getting Boke pilled here, first off.
There's no good way out of this.
The only way is the Boke way.
Nope.
Cash me outside.
No.
Cash E outside?
Please go back to talking about fermenting compost. Please.
Okay,
seriously,
fine.
talking about shit is better than this.
He's not wrong.
Someday when I'm famous as a comedian writer, you're all gonna say, I knew it was coming, and I'll be like, you motherfuckers, I have you on tape. Talking shit about me. Anyway, so let's talk about our buddy, Dr. Higa. So he went to school in Fukuoka. This is only a couple 100 miles from where our boy Masanobu Fukuoka was actively writing the One Straw Revolution.
That's wild.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on concurrently in this part of the world, all at the same time. The 1960s saw Fukuoka working on his farm and writing One Straw Revolution. Master Cho introduced the world to Korean natural farming, and Dr. Higa was coming up with EM1 for Bokashi.
So, okay, I always thought that, like, Bokashi was, like, a much older practice, like kimchi or something like that.
So you're right. It actually historically is associated with Korea and is considered to be thousands of years old. But it was the development of EM1 and the technique that Dr. Higa put together that helped really make it like accessible for modern living.
Okay, so he kind of took away for it to be done in a lab, I guess, scientifically. Sort of cash in on that? How does that work?
Yeah, so like traditionally it was like you dig a hole in the ground, basically a pit, put a vessel in the pit, dump your food waste, and then just cap it. So that way, like it was underground, kept at a steady temperature. And that was basically what Bokashi was. And I'm probably oversimplifying it because I don't know a whole lot about it, just kind of like the rough parameters. But then he was able to say, this is how we can do it in like apartment living. That was what was really valuable. And this all happened in the late 70s when he kind of finalized what he calls this EM1 recipe. While it's considered an optimized blend of LAB, yeast, and that PNSB that we talked about, there's a lot of debate of whether or not anything but the LAB and yeast are doing anything beneficial at all. And at this point, there's no real evidence to actually say yes. And YouTube, in this case, will agree with you. We know what LAB is capable of, and some argue that PNSB isn't effective in the anaerobic conditions. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to really weigh in, but it does make me far more comfortable to just do a batch with like LAB and some yeast.
Okay, so he found this and then decided to start selling it to make Bokashi.
Well, not exactly. It's kind of a wild story. He linked up with this fringe religion. It's called SKK, and it's basically like a Unitarian kind of one God, we're all in this together kind of thing. And they were obsessed with natural farming, even claiming ownership of a practice called Kyusei natural farming. He is and never was a follower of SKK, but clearly saw an opportunity and took advantage of this reality.
Shocked that some like new age non-denominational spirituality group like linked up with something like this.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm surprised we don't see more scientists linking up with that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of this trying to tie into permaculture, like that one earth, one people kind of stuff. Nothing that I'm aware that's particularly cultish or dangerous, but it's out there for sure.
It's a matter of time.
Yeah, and given the current ecological and economic crises we're facing, I definitely think it's something to keep an eye on moving into the future. And I think we saw some of this starting to come out with like the COVID and kind of the reaction from some of the permaculture communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's probably another a discussion for another day.
The list.
Yeah, put it on the list. So to get back to Bokashi, what's actually happening in this fermentation process? This process involves the production of organic acids such as acetic acid, which we see in like the production of live vinegar, which we have a video on YouTube for.
Okay, and just this is like the low pH. This is like towards the bottom end of the pH scale. So like acidic side, right?
Yes, we see that. Lactic acid, butyric acid, and a bunch of others. All of these are low pH, and this stops decomposition the same way, again, that vinegar that we just talked about stops food from rotting, and this allows that fermentation process to begin. The low pH, just like in LAB, inhibits and destroys the pathogens. Those acids have actually been studied in Korea to control soil pathogens as a fungicide.
Okay, I'm curious though. Why is that part of the world like so far ahead of, I guess, the Western world and like natural farming research?
I mean, like, probably they aren't like as thoroughly owned by like petroag as we are here. The governments maybe like invest a little bit in the health of their people.
What's that like?
Huh.
Yeah, sounds nice.
So we've talked about the microbial component, the EM1, right? Now, multiple producers make their own proprietary blends, and these can vary not only in microbe content, but how many microbes are in it. The reason I'm bringing that up is that despite the idea that it's the secret, quote unquote, perfect formula, it's pretty open to some kind of interpretation. The key is to have the right diversity to adapt to a wide array of foods to break down. At home, we can take cultures from a purchased EM mother. So anyone that's like messed around with live vinegars or kombucha is familiar with this concept of like a mother, right? That's usually that like thing that's living inside of it. And you can take cultures from that, take a chunk of it, and basically start a new thing. Now, we've talked how the brand is basically to give the EM critical mass because obviously, like, spoiled food will have molds and other stuff coming in with it. So we do have to be aware of how much of these molds we're adding so we don't create too much competition, much like Elliot had mentioned earlier. What's pretty cool, though, about this whole process is that when EM is the dominant strain, and I'll say strain loosely here, like if that collection of microbes, it's been actually shown to help train those wild microbes moving in to process the food similar to the EM.
That's pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. So I'm guessing based on that concept, as you add food, especially when it's like a lot at a time, or you're like seeing or maybe smelling problems, you add more of the Bokashi brand just like right on top.
Exactly. A lot of it is really intuitive. You know, you add the food, you add some stuff to break it down. You add more food, you add more stuff to break it down. So let's talk about what that Bokashi brand actually is.
Oh, we can skip this part. I actually had some Raisin Bran Crunch for breakfast, so I definitely know what bran is. You know what I mean?
Oh, I love that crunch. The crunchy boys. Yeah, let's talk about that carbon source that is basically neutral and can grow microorganisms fairly easily. So the same way we make like IMO3 and KNF, like we had talked about previously, typically folks will use rice or wheat bran or even rice hulls, but you can even use things as accessible as like paper or coffee in a pinch, but it's not really ideal. But we'll talk about why it's not ideal in a moment. I want to run through the process and then, like I said, we'll cover why those things aren't ideal. So you're going to want to take some blackstrap molasses and water and bring the water to a boil and mix it together at 11-to-1 ratio, water to molasses. The idea here is basically you want to add the molasses to warm water so it, evaporates into the water. And then we're just going to keep doing that. So you've done it at 11-to-1 ratio to start. After this is mixed, you'll take this and mix it with another room temperature water at 3-to-1. Again, mix it until it's fully gone through. Because of the volume differences in the ratio, you'll probably do it in a 5-gallon bucket. The reason why you don't do it all at once is because then you'd be heating up a huge amount of water, and that's just not really accessible for most folks.
Okay, so you're basically watering down this molasses significantly, and this is also not how you make rum.
Exactly. Like, if you want rum, you got to add more than just some molasses, and just not a little bit. Come on. If you're going to make rum, you do it right.
Go on.
That's another episode. Put it on the list.
Yeah, when are we gonna get to the bootlegging miniseries?
Oh man, that's such a good idea. We really should do a bootleg miniseries. That'd be dope.
Let's actually put that on the list.
Wait, you guys haven't been putting these on the list?
Fuck. No, I misplaced my scroll.
Oh, okay. So
fucking 12-foot thing's hard to lose.
Yeah, so like I was saying, you have to have the water warm for it to mix correctly, and if it was cool, it wouldn't distribute in the water evenly. Additionally, the other side is that if you have too much water you're trying to heat up, that's not like, do you want to spend a bunch of money on heat for heating up pots of water? No. So this is a little bit easier. So based on however many ounces of molasses you added at the beginning, that 11-to-1 ratio, whatever that one was, you're going to add equal parts EM to that. Once that's done, you've basically made like a liquid IMO2 if you want to like have a reference for like KNF. And if you don't remember what IMO2 is, you've harvested the microbes out in nature, and then you've added it to a bunch of sugar and rice. Or, well, you've already had the rice, but you add a bunch of sugar and mix it up, and it just sits in a jar, and it's basically shelf-stable food for the bacteria.
I'm following you.
Now, for every ounce of EM that you've used, which is, again, also the same amount of molasses, you're going to put 4 pounds of wheat, rice, whatever it is that you're going to use, in another separate bucket. So, like, 2 ounces of EM, 8 pounds of wheat bran. You're basically going to add your liquid to this mix of wheat bran, mix it through until every part of the bran is wet. It should squeeze into like a ball. If it doesn't, add a little bit more water. If it's too soupy, add more bran. Not really rocket science.
Yeah, it's just like a big bowl of porridge.
Yeah, not even. Like, you want it to be able to squeeze. You don't want it to be like dripping out of your hands when you've got it in that nice ball.
Yeah. So this is the point that the EM is like inoculating the entire brand bucket.
Yeah, so you've added it to this bucket. It's basically spread throughout the entire brand. What you're going to do is then stuff it into like some Ziploc bags and squeeze as much air out of it as you can. So you're not adding competition for that EM that you've added to it, right? So you can put this someplace warm for like 2 weeks out of direct sunlight because, microorganisms don't generally like direct sunlight, especially stuff that's decomposing. Again, this should sound pretty familiar to like making IMO3. Now, after 2 weeks, you can just open up those bags and smell it and see if it smells good.
And by good, you mean like kind of sourdough, yeasty smell?
Yeah, it's like, I think people know when something smells like it's gone bad. Like, you can be like, yeah, it smells like it's gone bad. And people are like, I can't tell. And it's like, no, you would know. Like, breaking your leg. Like, is it broken? You probably know. Like, there's a very big difference between broken and not broken. Although, I don't know, I've never broken my leg, so maybe I'm not the right person to make that assessment.
Yeah, I absolutely destroyed my knee when I crashed a motorcycle this one time, and I did not know my knee did not work until I took a step, and then my leg bent the way that
Right, that's
it
like
just
shock, though.
doesn't normally bend. No.
That sounds just fucking
think.
awful.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
good. Did you break your leg?
No, my knee was broken.
Oh, I
Very
didn't know you
broken.
could break your. Oh, you're like your kneecap, or like, how do you break your knee? It's a joint.
Yeah, ACL, MCL, meniscus, like all
gotcha.
the things
Yeah.
that where your knee is supposed to be, that was all gone.
Okay.
knee stuff is like awful. Oh.
Yeah. Speaking of knee stuff, you guys should
Speaking
listen to
of-
this commercial.
Breaks.
Speaking of breaks,
Speaking
wow.
of breaks,
That was real
that was
smooth.
better than we planned.
Real smooth.
Hey there. Is your name George? Do you use foundations to funnel money to organizations to bypass tax regulation? Are you recognized as maybe funding radical leftist movements across the globe? Well then, this commercial is for you. Specifically you, George. My name is Andy, and the Poor Proles Almanac is looking for you. Come fund our program. We've got boomsticks. We collectivize the energy of the sun with plants. If this sounds like an ad made explicitly for you, go support the Poor Proles Almanac at poorproles.com.
That was great. Made my knee not hurt so much, so thank you for that. Laughter is really the best medicine.
Other than medicine.
And penicillin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Outside of medicine, laughter is the best medicine, yes.
So yeah, how'd that Bokashi bucket smell?
No, you're supposed to be the one smelling it, man. I
I'm
got
not-
the bucket, you smell it.
I'm not putting that Bokashi on my face.
Yeah, so go
Oh
ahead.
man. Yeah, so once we got our bran all fermented and inoculated, getting us back on track, what are we doing with it?
So mostly we're drying it and we're spreading it out and letting it air dry. Now, depending on time of the year and humidity, you might want to like turn it, much like a compost pile. Within a few days at most, it should be done. The finished product can store in a container for over a year, and you can estimate that you'll use about a pound of rice bran. The finished product can be stored in a container for a year, and you can estimate that you'll use about a pound of the rice bran that you started the process with for like every week or so.
So basically, you're just like dehydrating it, right? So if you have a dehydrator already, because I mean, if we're being honest, like all our listeners are crazy preppers like that, would that like work as well in a dehydrator, or does it need to be like a slow drying?
Yeah, I think it would probably get a little bit too hot because, microbes.
Yeah.
This actually reminds me of one of the reasons I was spitballing the podcast with Andy, because I'm pretty sure we were pretty drunk one time, and I asked him about like why don't we use human manure, like people poo, for composting, and he went on a rant and ended up yelling like to the wee hours of the morning, and I don't know, it was just one of those things where I was like,
It was at a hotel across the street from a Denny's, all right? There's very good reasons to be yelling at
after
the wee
getting
hours.
drunk at that hotel bar that was miserable.
Yes, absolutely. I had every reason to be yelling. Just want to make that clear.
Didn't start yelling, you just kind of warmed your way up to it.
It's the way to do it. Like, you got to build the vocal cords up. You got to loosen them up. Be ready.
True. But I'm just wondering, how effective would this be for like this Bokashi brand? How effective would it be for like a compost toilet?
So, people do it, but I don't have any personal experience with it. But It's definitely something to be thinking about and to be aware of. And there's like a lot more that goes into processing humanure. But that Matt, put it on the list.
It's on the list.
Don't put it on the list. No, actually put it on the list. I'm just gonna screw with you.
Do you think I have a list?
We do have a list. It's got like 600 things on it.
Okay.
I'm gonna start adding stuff right now.
You should and see if I notice.
Got to go back to the old episodes.
What was the good one from earlier this episode?
Bootlegging.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we should.
Yeah. To get back to EM, you can what's called activate your EM, which is a way to say you're going to grow it out before using it, so you have more of it. And that process is more complicated than it sounds, and not something we really have time to go over today. Matt, while you're on that list, get on it.
Activating your EM. Got it.
Yeah. So if you do a quick Google search, you can probably find some examples of how to do that. The biggest challenge is, supposedly, and I don't have a lot of experience with this, is that as you do these generationally, the cultures start to shift in their ratios. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing. I'd imagine that harvesting from your bucket, similar to how we harvest like IMO1 and KNF, would also get you those strong, healthy microorganisms. I've never tried it. Go do it and tell me how it works. You know, you just have to spend some time thinking about how you'd want to scale that up.
Okay, so I'm thinking of other cheaper alternatives. What about paper and spent coffee?
So spent coffee does work, but you know, it's old coffee. Like if you've ever thrown coffee, like an old coffee filter in like your compost, it has a lot of retained liquid, which can make balancing that liquid ratio kind of challenging if you don't want to have like a soggy mess that takes forever to dry. It's definitely worth doing and trying if you drink a lot of coffee and you get more comfortable with this process. Now, paper has the opposite problem. It's difficult to work with because it's so chunky. It works, but it does come with a little bit of extra work, but it is worth keeping in mind if supplies become more expensive.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is if I've got a lot of documents to dispose of thoroughly in a hurry, Bokashi might be a good option for me.
You know, I've heard, just saying I've heard it, not that I know anything, that's what Hillary did for Benghazi. She is a terrible person who just recently was like in support of the far right woman in Italy because she's a woman, but hear me out, not a wasteful monster.
All right.
Matt's just shaking his head at me.
No, yeah.
Get used to it, Matt.
God, if nothing, I respect her for not being wasteful.
If nothing.
If nothing.
Literally nothing.
So what kind of bucket do we need to toss this stuff into? Like any old bucket or like...
Yeah, this is kind of the biggest downside in my own personal opinion is that you do need like an airtight container. And I use airtight kind of loosely. Like it doesn't need to be a pressurized airtight. Like I said, historically, this would have been like buried underground with like a small lid on top. Basically, all of the commercially available Bokashi buckets are the same. They're basically trash barrels with tight lids and a screen above the bottom to allow the liquids to drain out, which is another soil amendment, supposedly, that comes out of it. They also have a spigot on the front to drain the tea from the bucket if you choose.
So thinking like long-term collapse and all, like what alternatives are there?
I would probably just dig a hole and do like they did a million years ago or like a couple thousand years ago. Dig a hole and put a little cap on it.
Holes and some tarps, I guess, is what he's saying.
Hell yeah. Tarps disintegrate quicker than you'd expect.
Yeah, I bet.
Elliot's going to be firing up a clay, making some clay for us. It's going to be fun.
I'll do my best, Andy.
So if you want to DIY it, the most common method, and I'm on the fence about it, I've done it and I'm not a huge fan, is to take 2 5-gallon buckets and drill holes in the bottom of the top one so the liquid drops into the lower one without needing to deal with like a spigot. And of course, given that you typically have food waste every day, you will probably need at least 2 buckets. You fill one up and then you let it finish fermenting for usually a couple weeks while starting the next, so you could try a couple options before settling in one direction.
Everyone knows a good Bokashi has at least 3 loads going at a time.
And we have got to work on the phrasing in this podcast.
Anyways, what's this process look like? Not the 3 loads. Basically, sprinkle some of your bran on the bottom. Matt is rolling his eyes at me as I sprinkle my bran. Add your first layer of scraps like an inch or so thick and sprinkle more bran over the top. If you want maximized efficiency, which I prefer, you can press the waste down so that the microbes aren't having to cross like big air pockets in the bucket. So what I do is you've got your air sealed lid, and then you can go and get the like normal like little clip-on lids that you can buy for like $2 at Home Depot for a 5-gallon bucket, and you can just cut the rim off of it and it fits perfectly inside, and just use that to press down every time you add new food. Now, when you add like meat or dairy, I definitely recommend adding a little extra bran. It should basically be like powdered sugar on a waffle.
A+ metaphor. You're doing a great job, both of you.
Just for you. Got that waffle game.
Okay, so more meat, more wheat. So every time you add food scraps, you sprinkle a little more bran on top.
Yeah, and like it's like a once a day kind of thing.
Okay, so instead of like throwing your scraps in after every meal, you do it like once a day with everything, or every other day to like preserve the airlock?
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't want to be opening it up all the time, or you're just kind of defeating the purpose of having the airtight lid, right? Then that can be like one extra step, and as opposed to like composting, it's like you've got basically like your day scraps, and then you put it in your bucket. That's your longer term scraps, and then you've got your stuff that is already full and sitting for a couple weeks. So when it's full, like I said, you sit it or you let it sit for like a couple weeks, and you want it to be someplace like room temp or whatever. And again, people talk about draining off the Bokashi tea every few days, and many people use it in their garden or whatever. I've got opinions about that. I might bring that up in a minute. We'll see. So when you break open the bucket after like 2 weeks, you'll probably get hit with like really vinegary smell and a fluffy cloud of white mycelium on the pile, just like an IMO1 harvest, right? It's taking over the entire thing. And it will look oddly still like the food that you put in, and you'll be like, shit, I screwed up. But it's okay.
So it's not coming out like regular compost at this point.
No, at this point it's technically called pre-compost, and it's basically like half broken down food. You can bury this in the garden or spread it out. You can do a lot with it. But introducing it to any kind of soil will basically finish off that breakdown of the food within a week or two.
So you're dropping some like super nutrient dense, low pH clusters in your garden every week or two?
Sort of. The pH neutralizes pretty quick, and the volume is dependent on the volume of food scraps you collect. Now, if you don't want to be digging holes, or if the ground is frozen, or you're looking to use it for making potting soil, you can mix it with soil in a bucket, just sandwiching the pre-compost between the soil. Again, much like with your Bokashi bucket, if you're doing that, have drainage holes at the bottom of the bucket, collect the tea, and do whatever with it. And that process usually takes like 3 weeks or so. So all in all, you're looking closer to like 5 weeks for this process. If you're taking your buckets and putting them in the basement where it might be a little bit cooler, it might be closer to 7 weeks from like closing the lid on the bucket being full to having soil.
And there you have it, the unlimited potting soil hack.
Yeah, the final product is pretty light, and when you amend it with other stuff, whether it's like a small batch of JMS or IMO 3 or 4, we can start to see how we can, and I hate to use this phrase, close the loop for our food systems in a very personal sense. This is magnified if we're also growing grains or rice and using that waste for the bran. And honestly, like having 50 pounds of leftover bran, which is what you'd need a year, is probably pretty close to what you'd grow for your own personal use, which is, I think, kind of cool.
That's pretty nice, because I feel like a lot of the time the bran from your like homegrown grain just gets like blown away when you separate when you like thresh it. So this is a fantastic use for it.
It's not compost. It's not dirt and shit. It's Bokashi. It's what's for breakfast. Brought to you by the Poor Proles Almanac. No, this wasn't a commercial. I just don't have anything to add to this. I'm completely lost.
Good. I like to keep you lost. Keeps you on your toes.
We're still talking about dirt and shit, aren't we?
Yeah, always. Only dirt and shit. 2 shits, 1 cup. So let's talk quickly about the tea.
That's not the name of the video, man.
I know it's not, Elliot. This is the Poor Proles edition on Cornhub. Come on, keep up. But I do want to talk about this tea thing. I feel like there's something nasty about tea, but we're not going to go there. I do want to talk quickly about the tea that comes off of this, because people have a lot of very strong opinions about things like compost tea. This tea is also called leachate, and it's something that should be used within hours of collecting and getting exposed to like the microbes in the air. If you have like indoor plants, that's considered the perfect use for it. And if you can't use it that quickly, just pour it down the drain to help with your septic system if you have one.
Damn, that wouldn't really occur to me.
Yeah, so the problem I have with like the idea of this tea being like super nutrient dense or whatever is like we talked about putting coffee filters in your compost, right? It's got a lot of moisture in it. If you're pressing that down, or even if you're letting it sit and letting the natural pressures of existing slowly drip that residual coffee out of it, filtered coffee is not like a super nutrient for your plants, right? You know, the sugars start breaking down in bananas and the liquid drips off. There's nothing special about that liquid. So this is why I tend to have a problem with this idea of like compost teas, especially for something like this being particularly like beneficial. There's a lot of debate about this and the efficacy of compost teas as a whole. Right now, like I said, I've messed around with them because I have the Bokashi buckets. I've never really seen any benefits. And, I've had really good success with KNF and Jadam, so I don't really bother with them. But it is something I do want to cover in the future. So if you are a big advocate for compost teas, this is something that you can use, supposedly. And, of course, dilute it because it could be very acidic, and use it quickly.
I was kind of expecting you were going to be a compost tea kind of guy.
What can I say? I'm an anomaly.
Ain't that the truth?
I thought he was just fucking weird.
I'm also that, yes. At some point, like I said, we'll go into, some criticism of or analysis of compost tea, but that's not going to be anytime soon. But I do want to talk about science, though. So in terms of like Bokashi versus compost, or just Bokashi in general, what does the science really say? Applications of Bokashi compost has shown up to 40% increases in crops such as radishes when it's used as a top dressing. But that's not really surprising, right? Like, we know we're adding organic matter. There's nothing really crazy about that. But how does that compare to like traditional compost? Now, that's the question I think that's really interesting here. But apparently that's only me, because there's really no academic studies that I could find that did side-by-side tests.
Well, what do you know? It doesn't sound like anybody could find research or evidence, especially you, Andy. You couldn't find research or evidence on this because you are the expert on dirt and shit. There's nobody better than you at dirt and shit, man. I'm telling you.
So true. Number one.
I am the shit man. Oh man, there's a movie, Poop Monster. I think it's called Poop Monster. Now I gotta look it up.
Have you seen it?
Hold on. I think, who is in it? Somebody famous.
Nobody famous. Poop Monster kills careers.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a
He doesn't kill people. He kills careers. That's
no. You know what it is?
The scariest thing of all.
It's Monster'd. That's what it is. If that's not the best name of a movie you've ever heard.
Dom, please, for the love of all that is good, cut this out.
Monster'd. Everyone go watch it.
This is just like a matter of public safety now. Dom, please.
The tagline is "Don't get caught with your pants down."
All right, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's
I'll
beautiful.
watch it now.
All right,
Yeah,
I'm
I
on your side.
Let's put it on the list. We'll all talk about it.
And they work at DoTech, like duty. Come on, yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful.
It's not beautiful. It's shit.
Okay, so speaking of shit, I did kind of figure out a backdoor way into getting an answer, but the look on Matt's face right now is just
You're so
priceless.
lucky you're fucking 50 miles away from me right now.
So there seems to be two areas of interest in both Bokashi and compost studies. The first is the obvious one, the impacts on plant growth, which I don't think are particularly radical or surprising. Like I said, you're adding nutrients to plants, so like of course they're going to do better. And the second is, how much nutrient loss does the process actually have? So I took a look at the studies assessing estimated nutritional loss by comparing the mineral profile of the compost versus the materials that went in. Of course, this is assuming that mineral losses would be the same across different materials. Are you going to lose more minerals if you use bananas versus oranges or whatever? We could dig deeper into this, and as well as like how low or high pH foods might be more or less likely to leach minerals and nutrients. But given that there was literally only a couple of studies on this, it's not something we can do. It's beyond the scope of what we're doing, at least for now.
God help me if it's on the list.
The list.
So in the studies I did review and are listed in the show notes, nitrogen losses in traditional composting range from 24 to 36%. The study points out that there are a significant amount of factors that play into this range, from water use, temperature, carbon content, and so on. Bokashi, on the other hand, has almost no studies in this specific area, but, big but, for Monsterd, we can back out some data from work done on some Bokashi composition studies.
You're nerding out pretty hard right now, and I don't know what any of those numbers meant. I know what some of the words mean, but what's going on?
Okay, so yeah, I don't know, like, it's really fun to, and this is very nerdy, but like, to find data and then be able to translate it into something else because no one else has decided to do that. Like, that you're putting these pieces together that no one else has done. It's like, it's fun. It's cool. It's what the kids are doing these days, Elliot.
I'm just going to let you have it. Yeah, I'm not going to tell them. No, don't change.
Okay.
Keep doing you, buddy.
Be me. So anyways, while not the point of the study, the one I did find did show around a 20% loss of those same nutrients in Bokashi. And again, the same argument is made that it's incredibly impacted by temperature, sources, and so on. So the question you might ask is, like, where did it go? Theoretically, some of it's lost in chemical reactions, some to the air, and some through that leachate.
So I've been looking a little into Bokashi before this episode, and I noticed there's like a big DIY culture around it. And I think that's kind of what makes it like most accessible for people interested in it. So while on the surface you need to like buy all this stuff, it doesn't like have to be that way if you're willing to like get dirty. And if you've like seen other people that like they're not experts, you're not an expert, but like if they're doing
just having fun doing shit,
maybe I can do it.
Yeah, hell yeah. So it can be as cheap or as expensive as you want it to be, but it doesn't really have to be expensive. And that's like a pretty relative term here. You can buy those Bokashi buckets for like $40, or you can make them with stuff from Home Depot, which I didn't even talk about what I do, which is basically taking one bucket as opposed to two, getting the base that you put inside a 5-gallon bucket for like cleaning your car. So it's got like little holes in it for like all the like little dirt and stuff to fall to the bottom. So like it does the same thing for leachate. So you get your 5-gallon bucket, you put one of those in instead of drilling holes, and then you just put a spigot on the front and then air seal on the top. There you go. So you can make it as cheap as you want. I think those cost like $18 a piece for me to build. So in terms of the actual Bokashi, I don't necessarily think it's particularly better than hot composting, but I think it does offer some benefits. The one that's big for me is keeping compost accessible during the winter seasons when I've got like stuff growing in my basement. Now, I do some of both. Bokashi for some scraps, like I said, more in the winter, and then like compost piles outside for, I'll have like my chicken manure or other animals, being able to use that in a traditional compost pile, adding this, letting the chickens dig through, food waste, things like that. Food scraps I get from other places can go outside to the hot compost. The Bokashi is basically used for like a topsoil amendment for potted plants, or just like whatever I really want to keep a little bit, I guess, away from the compost world, like the traditional compost space, when it's too hot to go outside and do stuff or whatever. And I don't want to like introduce worms or bugs to my grow room. So this is like a little bit of a better solution for making like indoor potting soil.
Okay, so each process has its place pretty much.
Kind of seems like this is like this can be used for like sort of a more sterile compost.
Yeah.
Well, not sterile, but like not having macroorganisms in it.
Yeah, and you're not going to introduce seeds from like weeds or anything if you're like weeding in your garden and you're throwing that in a compost. You're not going to have any of those issues that you would traditionally have with a compost pile.
Okay, so what if we took these buckets, right, and put them in the grow tent between veg and flower cycles to make Bokashi for homegrown bud? Do you think that would work?
Absolutely. It's basically like JLF, but with making the soil like a JLF, like the full compost piece. I think that'd be a pretty cool process, actually.
I'm going to add that to my list.
Okay, it's on Elliot's list. I'm trying to get this man to buy a grow tent. He does not want to listen to me.
Not in this house, man.
Can do it.
Nope.
Be free.
Nope, got no room.
Matt, help me here.
Backyard, dude.
I would have to get rid of my dining table, the table that I eat dinner at. My wife will not let me.
Not yet.
No, she doesn't love me that much. That's what I said. She won't let me do it.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys have learned a little bit about Bokashi. I know Matt did. I don't know about Elliot.
I know I did.
But-
I learned a little bit. I learned a little bit about a lot, I think.
Okay. So next week we're going to be talking with some folks about Bokashi and soil amendments and all that cool stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this and you want to learn a little bit more. And we'll be talking to Brandon Rust. And yeah, fun times.
Name drop.
Brandon.
Hell yeah. Thanks for hanging out, guys. As always, drop us a review or a like on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen. And again, as always,
make all your friends listen, is what Elliot's saying.
Family too. This is the
At
Poor
the dinner
Pearls
table.
This is the Poor Pearls Almanac.
What could be better than a little dinner time Poor Pearls?
Yeah, a little shit talk at the dinner table.
Literally every episode would start a fight between generations.
Yes, that's what we want.